Hello and welcome to this video. My name's Beckham. The subject here is just a brief look at Photoshop's workspace, setting up the preferences, those few we need, and also taking just a quick look at the colour preferences too. When we launch Photoshop, you will see this screen, which is called the Start Workspace. You'll see this or something very similar to it. As you can see, this screen shows us the files that we've recently opened in Photoshop, or we can start by creating something new. If we look up at the top left, we can see that we have some choices. We can select recent images, which is what we're looking at here. We can select Creative Cloud Online images if you have any, and also Lightroom images if you're also a Lightroom user. Now the screen we're viewing is actually part of our preferences selections, which we can look at next. There's a shortcut key for bringing up the preferences, but how often are we going to want to do that it demands a key? But there's one there if we want it, Control K. But I'm going to go up to the top left of my screen, choose Edit, down at the bottom Preferences, and I'm going to bring up my General Preferences window. If I were to talk even briefly about the many preferences we have here, both you and I would quickly lose the will to live. There are just far too many of them for that, and the majority of them are going to be irrelevant to us anyway. It's going to be far better, I think, if I just talk about the one or two Photoshop preferences where I think there's a need. It's certainly going to be far quicker. Let's start with the General, which is the top one at the top left. In the General section, this is where we get the opportunity to turn off the screen you can see behind the Preferences window, the Start Workspace. It's going to be a personal thing, but I choose to work from Photoshop's bridge most of the time. So I'm going to remove the tick in that box. The next option I'd like to take you to is the Workspace. Now there is one option here that I like to tick. It's the auto collapse of iconic panels, and I think I'll demonstrate exactly what this does in a few moments. So I'm going to tick that box and move on to my scratch discs. Photoshop does a lot of its work using the RAM we have installed in our computer. But if it runs out of RAM, it writes temporary files to our hard drive, and they are what is referred to as scratch disks. Now it makes sense here to make sure that any drives you have in your computer have enough space. Now you can take a look here and see that I've got 3 drives. I have my C drive where I keep my operating system and of course install all of my programs. But I have 2 other drives for my photographic work, and you'll notice that the E drive has quite a bit of space free. So it would make sense here if I selected that one, and using the arrow on the right I can move that up as the first choice as a scratch disk. Now out of the other 2 there's about the same amount in both of them, both in the C and the F. But I tend to want to keep the scratch disks away from the C drive, and from time to time I'll remove data from the F drive, so this is likely to climb up a little higher, so I'll choose to put that second. So there's my scratch disks set up. The next option I'd like to take you to is the transparency and gamut, but it's the transparency I want to talk about mostly. This is a pure preference, but aren't they all, I suppose? You can use what you want here, and it's not going to affect how Photoshop works. But you're going to be seeing blue and white squares in these videos that show transparent areas of our image. So it makes sense to match what I've got here with what you're going to see in the videos. If we do nothing, that's the sort of thing we'll see with transparent sections of an image. I choose to increase the grid size to large, and I choose the grid colors blue, and that's the sort of thing you're going to be seeing. So I think we can move on to units and rulers, and here I would just say select the measurement that you're comfortable with. I happen to be more comfortable with inches, so I would set that. That's it. There's nothing else that we need to change. I'm going to click OK to accept what changes that I've made here. Now the spinning round of the screen has allowed me to close down Photoshop and then relaunch it, and then we don't see that Start Workspace screen, but we come directly to the main Photoshop window. Now Photoshop is so broad in its capabilities that it comes with a set of screen suggestions depending on what we're doing. If I take you to the top right here and we look in this drop down section, you can see we have options for if you're working with 3D graphics, graphics and the web, motion, which is video of course, painting, and of course photography. I'll select photography for the moment. So if we're a photographer working in Photoshop, this is Adobe's best guess for the tools we're likely to want. But of course they don't know for sure, because each of us is an individual. Now wouldn't it be great if the newer user of Photoshop could go into the preferences and tell the software that they are new to this? The software would then tuck away a lot of the panels and options that you certainly don't need for a while, if at all. Now of course Photoshop can't do that, but I think maybe I can, or certainly I can to some extent. Why don't we set up our own Photoshop screen with just what we need right now? I'll guide you on what the essentials are, and I think this is going to help. It's a small step, but it helps us to focus on what's important right now. In the drop down option at the top of the screen, we have one that says New Workspace. So let's create it. I'm going to call this one Barry's, and I'm going to say yes, I want the keyboard shortcuts and any menus and any toolbars, anything I add, I want this to be in my workspace. I'm going to save that. What I'm now going to do is to change everything you can see here and just leave in the window on the right just what I think we need to get started. So I'm going to drag out a lot of these tools, and you can see that's pretty easy, just click and drag. We don't need the histogram up there. I'm going to be working mostly through Camera Raw. We can remove the navigator, and don't worry about these are very easy to get back. Libraries I want to remove, and also adjustments. So I've taken quite a bit out of there. What I've got left is layers, channels and paths. All good things, but layers are the most important. We don't need channels yet. We don't need paths yet. But perhaps we could do with our undo history, which is this one here. Because it's good to be able to go back and change a mistake or just change our mind. Pick up the tab, drop it in alongside layers. I can use this little icon here, collapse to icons, and now you can see everything looks nice and tidy. All I need to do is hit all of these little crosses and remove all of those windows on screen. Now once all of those tools have been removed from the screen, if I go back to the drop down window here, I can always go back and select photography, or any others come to that. But I also have Barry's, and at any time I can come back to this point. I was also talking about collapsing iconic panels in the preferences. What that refers to is if we had an image open on screen and I needed to get access to my undo history or my layers, I can click them and it will open up. I could do or change anything I wanted to change, but when I come back to my picture and started to work, as soon as I touched the screen, as you saw, the panel on the right hand side collapses and it gives us a nice clean space to work in. Now of course there may come a time when we want to replace one or two of the options we've removed from the panel on the right hand side. So I'm going to go back to that panel and use the little icon at the top to just pop it out, because we can just click the layers and it'll pop out and back as we work on our images. But if we want the panel out semi-permanently, we can just click this little icon and it'll pop out onto the screen. Sometimes that's useful. If I go to the Windows menu, all of the options I remove from that panel are here. If I pick up one as an example, let's pick up the channels. It appears on screen and I can just pick up the tab and drag it into position. Now if I were to close down that panel, and maybe even if I were to go to one of the other screens here, let's go to the painting screen, I could come back to my Photoshop sometime later, and if and when I want to return to my personal screen, which we call Barry's, you'll notice when I pop it out that it now contains the channels. We don't have to resave it. This is Barry's screen, and anything I drop on the right hand side will become part of Barry's screen. And of course, just as quick and easy as I've demonstrated before, to remove them. Now let's take a look at our color preferences by going to Edit, Color Preferences, almost down the bottom. Now we have to remember what these options are called. They are preferences. So many of us are going to choose different ones. But when it comes to color preferences, it's got to be an individual choice. But here is my logic. The vast majority of my output is for screen use. So the color space that I would select would be sRGB, which is best suited for on-screen viewing. So I'm going to go up to my working spaces here and I'm going to change the RGB from Adobe RGB to sRGB, and down here the color management policies. Anytime I open an image up into Photoshop, what I want this to do is to convert it to my working RGB, which happens to be sRGB, because I'm working with on-screen viewing for most of the time, and I want my images and the color to look their best. Now that's all we need to do here. We can click OK to finish. I hope you've enjoyed this short video and it's helped in some way. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and also if you'd like to come along and see more about Photoshop for photographers, come to my website at www.beckhamdigital.com.au.